All right, welcome back, everybody. Let's hop right into it. Let's pick up where we left off with on Monday, right? So we're talking about the crafting system. We're kind of implementing how we wanted to sort of make it work. Sandy leaves, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. So let's go back to that just for a minute and let's kind of recap on the stuff we talked about on Monday. So we decided that how we're gonna have it is we're gonna more or less have some kind of base object, right? We want to build a raft. So maybe we have in our inventory, right? In our little inventory screen over here, we have like, if we were gonna do like the slot-based thing that we were kind of talking about, I don't know if we ever decided on that or not, right? We could have just like some wood or whatever filling up one of these slots. And then so you're like, I want to build, oh yeah, then you go and you click on something. We got to figure out a way to get it to, how are we going to let this wood know that it can be made into a raft, right? Is what I mean? So do you think we should have something like, just have like another pane right here, to where if we bring this wood over, we can just drag it and we can just like drop it, and then,
Oh yeah.
and then maybe like,
Like on an empty pane, you said?
yeah, it'd just be an empty pane. It'd be like its own little interface window we'd be dealing with. But I'm just trying to think of how we'd really integrate this. I mean, so we can bring over this wood, we can drop it, but then how's it going to know that this is going to be a raft versus just any other object in existence?
We could like maybe at the top of that window have like a little label where it says like maybe in the center it actually says raft, and then it's got like arrows where you could pick like maybe you could build like a raft or a fishing pole out of that piece of wood, and then they kind of know what they're trying to accomplish.
I'm not really following you on that. So you're saying just like we'll have like raft or
Whatever.
glider or speed boots, and just from a drop-down menu we'd be able to choose which one we want to build?
Kind of, but it only would show you like what that piece of wood could be made into. Like that piece of wood.
Oh, okay, so we could like click on the wood itself, and then from there it'd be like, these are the things that you're able to build.
Yeah,
Is that what you're
something
saying?
like that maybe.
Okay, we do something like that.
Are
What
we-
if we did this? What if we found on our starting island somewhere near where we're gonna put it, and on each of our starting islands we have our own individual ones. But what if we found like blueprints to make them?
Oh.
For example, you come across it and you're like, oh, okay, so I see this little piece of paper. I'm gonna pick it up, and it's like, this is a blueprint to make a raft, and it needs 4 pieces of wood and some string, and that's about it. And then so you load it up, and then maybe then you'd have your drop-down menu, right? And then from there you'd have a little drop-down menu, be like buildables, whatever, you know. And then from there you click on this little drop-down menu.
And it shows you all your blueprints.
Yeah, and then from there you can have like, you just have raft, right? Because you only found raft. And so you click raft, and then from there you just have this sort of, maybe from there you have, drops down. So you drop down to raft, and then you'd have just like the shadow imprint, like we were talking about, of these 4 pieces of wood, and then maybe like a rope shadow piece. And then you take this piece of wood and you click it, and it'll snap to your mouse, and you'll drag it over to this pane. And once you're on this interface, maybe one of these pieces will light up, and it'll be like, drop it here. And then you can drop it on top of there, and then it's like, it would kind of snap. Actually, what we were talking about wasn't actually going to snap, but this piece itself will be its own 3D fully constructed model. But it's just all these other pieces. All the pieces will just be textured differently. They'll be textured with sort of like a see-through transparent texture, which will make it look like that shadow piece. And then when we drop it on there, all we'll do is we'll take that one individual object and we'll change its texture to the actual textured object. And then we'll have a copy of this in the real world that then would just get like thrown on the ground or whatever, right? And then it would just have just that one piece of wood would be there. And then you could find a piece of string, and then it would wrap around, so on and so forth until it's built. We could do something like that, right? I think that would work. I was just gonna say something. I was thinking of something as I was saying that. See, my coffee hasn't kicked in yet. Okay. Do you guys want to do that? Do you guys think blueprints would be good?
Yeah, that's cool.
Is it going to show exactly Like when you find a blueprint, is it gonna show exactly where to put everything, or does it say these are the materials you need?
I think it'll be, you're walking around, this is just kind of what I just right now thought of in my head, right? Is that initially I was thinking you'd walk around, you'd see a little piece of paper, you'd walk up to it, you'd hit your interact or inspect or whatever, like probably just the mouse button when you have it hovered over. And you click on it, and then that will say, it'll pop up to you, and it'll be this kind of, it'll just be some picture that we draw in GIMP, right? It's just going to be some texture pane, right?
Yeah.
And then that pane is going to be, and that pane will have a sort of drawing of it. I mean, it'll be a drawing of a raft that looks like this, but it's not going to be a 3D model or anything like that. It'll just be something that we drop in GIMP that'll be,
Well,
it won't have like step
doesn't
by step.
necessarily need to be something we draw in GIMP. Can we pre-render it in?
All right, John, what are we talking about right now?
Well, you're talking about the crafting system, yes?
Nice, nailed it. All right, good. I was like, I'm interested to know if you even know what I'm talking about. So here's this, I'll catch you up real quick. So we were just talking about different ways we can implement it, right?
Yeah.
And so when we're just gonna take like the slot style inventory for now, we might change that later. Let's say you pick up a piece of wood, right? You don't have anything to do with that. You don't know what you can do with that wood. And then you can open up your crafting pane, and as long as you've come across this certain type of blueprint or something like that, then that will allow you then to build it. So if you find the raft blueprint, the little piece of raft paper on the ground, wherever,
Mm-hmm.
then now when you go in your crafting menu, you'll have a little drop-down list that'll be like, you can now build a raft. And then you'll have to find these pieces in some interesting puzzle-matic way. And that's when you'll drag and drop onto there. Ideally, the reason we want to do it in GIMP is because it would just be some basic looking picture. I mean, we want it to look like a blueprint. more or
Oh,
less.
I see what you mean.
Like a kind of, not necessarily a blueprint, maybe just a picture of some sort, you know, if you will. Just so the guys, just so the person realizes, just so the player realizes, okay, now that's something that I can do. You know.
Maybe like a note, you can find a note lying on the
I
ground.
still have some ideas.
Yeah, totally.
In that direction, but I'll have to look it up.
Yeah, well, I think that would be that's one way. Like I said, you know, none of the stuff is set in stone. We haven't put any of this into the game. And even once it is put into the game, we can always change it at a later date. So this is just sort of an idea. It was kind of a sort of recap on crafting. We really left it super open-ended on Monday when we left. We had no real idea where we wanted to go with it. All right. So anything else on crafting? Anything else we should keep talking about before we switch gears here in a second? In last minute, things to add?
So we were talking about using different like materials for certain parts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did we ever finish that? 'Cause I had a couple of other ideas, like
So basically, this is what I kind of just said too, is this will be a 3D object that we probably build in Blender, at least building the pieces
Mhm.
of each individual one in Blender. And then in Unity, we'll have that here, but we'll just texture it with some kind of transparent, sort of transparent looking material, so it looks like it's just shadow pieces.
Yeah.
And then when you click on this piece of wood from your inventory, it'll snap to your mouse and it'll drag it over to this pane. And once your mouse with this piece of wood is now inside this pane,
Mhm.
this will light up, and like each of these pieces of wood would be like sort of shiny in some way, indicating drop this piece of wood on there, obviously.
yeah.
And so once you drop that on there, all it's going to do is going to delete with whatever's in your hand, and it's going to change the texture of that piece that you dropped it on into the actual wood piece. So this thing is always whole, and it's always real, and it's always an existing object. It's going to have its own little script to keep track of what's been added to it.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good way to do it. I had some ideas of like having interchangeable types of parts, like for the raft, the floating part, like the actual part that floats. You can either use a log or tie together a bunch of boards into a block, or use like empty tanks that are washed up, or empty barrels or whatever. But that would be considerably harder to implement than what you just described, which I think is actually a pretty good
I mean,
way to do it.
we could kind of fake it,
Uh-huh.
and we could just do our inflatable water jugs or whatever, right? Or our pieces of plane that's going to keep us afloat. Those could just be logs to us. It would just be just different colored logs, which to the player would look like, oh, that's a piece of sheet metal, or that's a that's some kind of looking jug, and then when they drop it on there, it'll still snap right in, and it'll get colored in with whatever this texture is on this piece of wood.
Yeah.
So we could do something like that, where when all's said and done, it is going to operate exactly the same, and if you would have built it with wood versus with water jugs, it's going to be the exact same thing, but it could give the player a little bit of feeling like, oh, I'm doing it different than everyone else would.
Now, should you tell, like, when they say in the blueprints, you need this, this, this? It shouldn't say wood, it should just say you need
Yeah, I could call some
floatable
floating.
material, yeah.
Or it doesn't have to say you need anything, you just could show a picture.
Sure, it could just be a shadow piece altogether. It could just be a shadowy piece of a blueprint, and you're like, oh, okay, and it could just say raft, so the person knows, like, okay, this is a blueprint or something like that for a raft.
Yeah, like I've got to build a raft and I got to find 4 things that'll float.
Yep.
Exactly, and you walk around your little island and you find all things that can float.
Could you, like, be able to, if you pick up an item, like a piece of wood or a piece of metal from a plane, could you test it out, like throw in the water if it floats, be like, oh, that's a floating piece? Would you be able to do
totally
that?
could.
I
Yeah,
don't
you
know.
we could give pieces the property and the ability to be floatable, or what they could either float or sink. Yeah,
Yeah.
couldn't think of that one for a second. But we could totally do something like that, so where, and that wouldn't be, it'll be hard, but it won't be impossible by any means. It would more or less just be a little Boolean value where when it throws it, the water's going to have some form of collider to it for the player also to know when he's in that water. And so just when it hits that water, it would turn on, it would switch this Boolean of this object and make it so it just is floating in space, lurking back and forth between the 2 points.
Yeah.
Or ping pong. But we'll get to all that later.
And also, like, do we want the player, I heard you mention this right before, do you want the player to find, like, just a piece of paper around, or could we just
We didn't
give
mention
them a blueprint if they collect, like, a third or half of the items that would make up whatever it is that they're trying that they can build?
Yeah, I don't know. We didn't really discuss that, but we will have to have some way to. How are they gonna? I originally just said we'll just find a piece of paper on the ground, but that's not that great of a way of introducing it, right? That was just sort of get it out there. But I think we should come up with a more interesting way. We could totally do that, where if you gather 3/4 of the piece that you're making, somehow you just. I don't like the idea of just getting a blueprint, just randomly just magically appears in your inventory or something, but.
What if you could make the raft without the blueprint, but it'd be easier if you had, like, if you put all the pieces in that order, then it would.
Sure, so if you've already built it, or like this can build a raft, to where you just go to this build screen and you just start throwing stuff in there. Maybe.
Like,
It'd be hard to do.
That might be hard to, it's gonna be really hard to account for the player on their end.
And the way
but
we've described the crafting system already, we would have to readjust the crafting system.
we would, and we always can,
Yeah.
this is, like I said, we can always, none of this is set, and a lot of stuff will change, trust me, a lot of it will change, but that's okay, that's fine. So keep that in mind, I think that's cool. I do like the idea of if someone's already done it, to be like, I don't want to have to go and do whatever we are going to make them have to do to get this blueprint. Like, they should just be able to make it because they.
Or if they just know, like, okay, I bet I need to make a raft, and they just decide to make it.
Yeah.
Sure, right? For the players who've played one adventure game in their life and they understand, I got to get off this little island somehow.
Maybe, like, when you get the blueprint, it'll show you the shadow pieces, but if you don't have it, like, they're still there, but you can't see it. So, like, you pull a floatable thing into it, maybe it'll still light up, like, oh, you can put it right here. But you don't know, like, you don't see the shadow pieces, so you don't know, I need this, kind of thing.
You're saying if you haven't acquired a blueprint yet?
Yeah, like, they're still there, like, the objects, but they're not visible. Like, you can still put something there, but you don't exactly.
But then how are you going to know if you're building a glider versus a raft?
We
Well,
could
you have, like,
have,
a list of, like, stuff that you can build. Click on raft. If you have a blueprint, it'll show up. If not, it's still.
Well,
opens
I
up
mean-
the
Oh, if
raft.
not, we can have it. If not, it can just be like question mark, and it could be like, oh, now it gives the player an incentive to go and find it. And if they haven't,
Yeah.
found it yet, they could still have the ability to build on to that question mark. They won't know what they're building.
Mhm.
Might be sort of obvious if they're like, this thing looks exactly like a raft. It's obviously a raft that I'm making, but I don't think that finding the blueprint or getting this blueprint should be something that's really hard or difficult, though. I think that should be almost something that's almost a given, not necessarily it's not just gonna be
I
here
feel
you
like-
go. But
So, but like, what if you want to build a raft and you're on the hookshot island? Like, you could do it if you.
you could exactly
Like,
yeah. I like that. I like that idea. You could make it. You gotta think about
what if
how
we
you
have
make
like
it.
the
I mean, that's something.
crafting
that-
spot, like kind of like a grid, like pieces snap to a grid. And if you have the blueprint, then it shows up on the grid and it looks like it's snapping into the spot. But you could still build it like, as long as it's.
Maybe. I mean, we'll throw it out. I think that we got to keep that in consideration. I'm just having a hard time visualizing how we will do that. But you know, there's always a way to do things. We live in the day and age that we can make anything. So, all right. Okay. Any last things on crafting? I really want to start talking about more game concepts and I was talking about. I want to get into our character controllers. I want to talk about how we're going to make it. How are we going to want the game to feel? So, are we good on crafting for now? Do we have a good enough general idea on how we're going to implement it so where we can move on? Okay.
Yeah.
All right, then let's move on. Let's move on to, I guess I don't really even need a new board, but it's fine for now. So let's move on to, actually I'm going to stop this real quick and start it again so I don't have to do it later.